So let's move on. We'll have the research methodology. After the introduction, again, the research methodology. So what are the objectives of this topic? Describe the classification and types of study designs commonly used in health-related researches, and discuss the concepts and structure of common study design used in health-related researches, including experimental, quasi-experimental, observational, qualitative, and mixed method designs. So for the table of contents, di ba ingon ko kagaina ang research methodology, just like the introduction na ay mga subsections. Di ba sa introduction you have the statement of the problem, the hypothesis, significance of the study, and so on. Pag abot naman sa research methodology, these are the subsections. So first, we have the research design. You have to identify now unsa nga research design inyong gamiton sa inyong study. After that, the research local. So you have to identify where are you going to conduct your study, but the map should be included in the appendices. And then on the third part, you have there the population and sample. You have to identify who are your participants. If you are having you have human subjects. Pero kung experimental, so you have to identify what sample are you going to use. So included sa sample ang sampling technique. So kailangan nato mag-review og statistics here. I hope you can still remember what you have discussed in your statistics. Kaya kailangan pa na ninyo siya sa research. And then other parts of the research methodology syempre includes the research protocol itself. We call it data gathering procedure, the ethical considerations, and if ever you have statistical treatment, you really have to identify what statistical tool are you going to use in analyzing and interpreting your gathered data. So let's start with the research design because we have a lot of research design and it's very important that you know kung unsa nga research design ang applicable sa inyong study. So we have here, when you say research design, this is under the research methodology class, and you have to identify which method are you going to use in your study, and you have to provide also the rationale of the method in complementary with the research design. Now we have different types of classification. I mean, we have different classifications of our research design, and then the first one here is the research design based on time. Ma-encounter ninyo sila as you do your RRL, your review of related literatures and studies. So sahay maka-encounter mo og study nga nakabutang retrospective siya. Retrospective design. Pag sinabing retrospective design, you will be observing what happened in the past. Again, you will be observing what happened in the past. Retrospective man, balikan nimo siya. Pero your study will begin sa present and will end at the present time also. It's just that your data will be coming from the past. We call it retrospective. So we have here an example of a retrospective design, association between the use of phenylpropanolamine and the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. When you say hemorrhagic stroke, syempre, pag sinabing stroke, there is like obstruction in the blood vessel, and kapag magkaroon o injury with the blood vessel na membrane, and then mag-leak ang dugo, so that will be hemorrhagic stroke. Now, mag-study ka at the present, pangitaon nimo sa past, kinsa tong nagkaroon og hemorrhagic stroke, og naa ba to siya association sa paggamit nila ani nga chemical substance, the phenylpropanolamine. It's actually a drug. Brand name, Disodrine, kanang mga ingana ng mga drugs. So kung gusto nimo balikan to siya ha, humana sila, nagkaroon na sila hemorrhagic stroke. Pero tan-awan nimo kung kanibang nagkaroon ng hemorrhagic stroke, nigamit ba ang drug. So balik ka sa past. We call it retrospective design. Actually, when you study about COVID-19, a lot of the study published about COVID-19 is retrospective. Most of the data is coming from 2020. Ang tawag nila na retrospective cohorts, ang mga human participants nila katong mga nagka-COVID-19 last year. So gistadihan nila to unsa ilahang gibati, and kung tambal ilahang ginastadihan, effective ba ang tambal na ni sa mga nagka-COVID dati. Pero karon sila nagconduct ng study at the present time. So ang tawag ana retrospective design. So I hope na sabtan ninyo siya. What do you mean by retrospective? Balikan nato ang past. Pero mag-conduct ng study karon. Now, pag sinabing prospective design, it begins in the present and progresses forward. So you are collecting data towards the future. So, ang atong mga experimental studies, actually, most of them is under sa prospective design. So, magsugod ta karon, tapos, mag-end ato ang study sa future. So parehas sa inyo ha, magsugod mong study karon, pero mag-end ang inyong study next year. That's the future. It's prospective. Okay? It's a prospective study design. So for example, investigators were interested to determine the long-term effectiveness of influenza vaccines in elderly people. So mag-recruit sila og cohorts of vaccinated and unvaccinated community-dwelling elderly. So pwede na siya actually, example, inisa na lang nato para mas maging kanang present god ang ato ang example COVID-19. Magsugod kag study karon, tan-awan nimo ang long-term effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines. So imuha nang subaybayan class ang imuhang mga human subject na igrupo nimo sila, kani sila nagpa-vaccine, kani sila wala nagpa-vaccine. So mag-start kag study sa ilaha karon, and then the study will progress to the future, and you'll see there at the end kung unsa kataas ang effectiveness sa COVID-19 vaccine or kung effective yun ba siya. So mao lang na siya ang kalahian ni retrospective o ni prospective. So kani sila research design classified based on time. Okay? Questions about this? Kay duha ra man ni sila kabuo. Questions? Wait lang ha, let me just asa siya. Nakuha ko ang PowerPoint. So that I will be guided. Okay? Questions so far before ta mag-move on sa second classification? Wala. So let us continue. We have here classification based on study purpose. So let's see if ang inyong study ba mag-fall under this classification. So the first one we have here, the descriptive design. Under siya sa based on study purpose, because when you say descriptive, your purpose is just to describe your population or your sample, your human subjects in terms of their characteristics, or example, distribution of the variables, depende sa variables sa imong study, frequency of outcomes or interest. So lahi to siyang analytical study na naay mga comparison. Sa descriptive study class, we don't really do comparing, but we just report their description or kung unsa bang ato ang gustong i-describe about them. So descriptive studies includes case reports, case series reports, cross-sectional studies, surveillance studies, or ecological studies. So let me give you an example of a descriptive design. You have there, Chim et al. Conducted a large population-based survey in Australia to determine what community members think about the factors that do and should influence government spending on prescribed medicines. So this is actually a study about perception. Sa ba ang perception sa community about this certain topic? So descriptive study lang na siya. Class, pag moingon gani kag level of perception of the community or level of knowledge, level of practices or attitudes, kana na mga study, ang research design is descriptive because we will just be describing their level of knowledge, unsa ba kataas ilang knowledge, taas ba or mubo, that's description, right? So under siya sa descriptive design. We don't do intervention, we don't do comparison. Purely description lang sa atuang subjects. Based, description sa subjects na to on a certain phenomenon or topic or area na gusto na to i-describe. So I hope by now, ang uban sa inyo ha, kabalo na unsa inyong research design. Okay? So based on purpose na siya ha. Now we have also based on purpose pero ang tawag nato kay analytical design. So sa analytical design, ang hinahanap natin factors. Example, risk factors, associated factors, or mediating factors. But take note that the analytical design can either be experimental or observational. Na natay duha ka class na observational studies. We have the case control and the cohort studies. So pag mag-RRL mo, maghimo mo sa inyong RRL, daghan pud mo class makita nga case control and cohort studies. So let's differentiate the two. Pag sinabing case control studies class, medyo taas-taas ang nakabutang sa description, pero let us look at the illustration on the right side para mas makasabot ta kung unsa ng case control studies. Take note, the study begins here. Asa nakatudlo ang arrow? Dinhi sa study population. Pag maingon kag case control, your study starts with the identification of the case and the control. Mo na gitawag siya case control study. So unsa ang meaning sa case? The case actually are the subjects with the outcome of interest. Again, with the outcome of interest. Mo na siya tong mga example kung sakit ang atong ginatanaw, mo ni sila ang mga people class na identify nato nga naay sakit. Let's give a specific example. What do you want to know? Example sa COVID-19. So kani sila ang mga people class na naay case, meaning naa sila'y COVID-19. And then you will have another group na ang tawag nato sa ilaha kay control, meaning they are the subjects without the outcome of interest, meaning mao nitong mga wala nagkaroon og sakit. So dira mag-start ang ato ang study ha sa present. Kani sila na sakit, kani wala. Isa-isa sila ka grupo. And then we will go back. Mo na nga ang arrow is going backward kasi we will be measuring and evaluating the risk factors nga ilahang na experience sa past, mao na nga nagkaroon sila sakit or wala sila nagkaroon og sakit. So for example, sa cases, tanawon nato risk factor present. Example, nagadto sila sa mga party-party, for example lang ha. And then kani mga risk factor nga absent sa past ni siya before sila nagkaroon og sakit. So unya ang kaning mga controls, tanawon pud nato ang ilahang mga risk factors why wala sila nagkaroon og example COVID-19 or risk factor na mga present or mga absent for them. Mao na siya class ang case control studies. Mura pod siya og retrospective bitaw. Mura siya retrospective kasi your study will start at the present and then you will just go back sa past. So pero this is more on the identification of the factors. The factors na nag-contribute why nagkasakit sila or wala sila nagkasakit. This is under the analytical design, specifically case control na study. So to illustrate more about the case control study under sa analytical study design, you have here again the cases, mga tao nga na ay sakit, and then you have there the control. So mo ni siya walay sakit. And then this is on the present, and then we will go back to their past exposures. So i-check na to. Kani siya nga tao nagkaroon siya sakit, present ang factor A, pero wala siya factor B. So ingana ang pag-conduct sa analytical design. Kailangan lang din nato mabalaan ang mga risk factors nila. Okay, questions about the case control study design so far? This is still under the analytical design ha. Analytical design gihapon ni siya. Pero under niya siya sa classification according to purpose. Unsa day ang purpose nato? Mangita og factors. Now, other examples of the case control study design, we have here group of investigators carried out a study to establish an association between the use of traditional eye medicines and corneal ulcers. So, pwede manggod na siya class na magbigin kag study sa present, igrupo nimo kani sila, case ni sila, meaning naa sila corneal ulcer. Tapos you have here the second group, control ang tawag nato sa ilaha, wala sila corneal ulcer. And then we will go back sa past kung nigamit ba sila og kanang mga eye drops bitaw nga ginabaligya traditional eye medicine. So that's actually a case control study. Pero actually you can also do this using the cohort study design. Later I will also discuss kung unsa ng cohort study design. But for the meantime, let's have first the case control study. Another example here, association between aspirin and statin exclusive and combined and pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma occurrence. So ang case nimo kaning naay carcinoma, type of cancer, pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. Ang control katong wala nagkaroon og tingana nga cancer. And then you will go back sa past kung naa ba sila risk factors like nag-inom ba sila aspirin, nag-inom ba sila og statins or gi-combine ba na nilang duha ka drug. So i-check na nimo mo. And then sa conclusion, mo conclude ka whether ang kana na mga drugs maka-cause og cancer or not. That's case control. Present, i-group nimo sila and then go back to the past. Kung naa ba sila exposure ana nga factor. Okay? Questions again for the case control study? Wala. So mag-move on ta. So the next type of analytical design is called cohort study. So dili na ako basahon ng description din na. Let's focus sa illustration para mas masabtan siya. Now, the cohort study class can be prospective or retrospective. So pwede siya sagol. Cohort pero retrospective or cohort or prospective. Now, let's first talk about the cohort na retrospective or we call this retrospective cohort. So take note of this. Study begins here. You have the sample and then i-measure nato ang outcome. So tanawa nato ang past nila kay retrospective cohort man. So balik ka sa past and then identify nato ang mga subjects nga na-expose on a certain risk factor and then one group sila and then you have another group na wala na-expose on a certain factor. So, ang mga subjects with outcome already during the time nga nagsugod ka, wala na sila'y appeal. And then, tanawon nato during the present time, okay, kung nagkaroon ba sila o katong outcome or sakit nga ato ang gina-check. Okay, so this is again in the present time. Kani sila na ay sakit, kani sila walay sakit. And then, but ang past ang atong unang tanawon ha, kana nagkaroon sila factor, I mean exposure sa factor, tas tanawon nato sa present time kung nagkaroon ba sila sakit or wala. Kani wala sila na expose, pero tanawon gihapon nato sa present time whether nagkaroon sila og sakit or wala gihapon. So retrospective cohort siya. Unsay kalahian nila basig nalibog mo ma'am, parehas lang man to siya sa case control. Ang case control class baliktad, mag-start ka sa outcome. Again, ang case control mag-start sa outcome ha, nya balikan nimo ang factor. Sa cohort studies, mag-start ka sa factor and then going to the outcome. Mo na ilahang kalahian ha para dili mo maglibog. Basig naglibog mo parehas lang man to ma'am. Dili na sila pareho. Mag-start ka sa factor pag maingon ka og cohort studies. And then mag-end ka sa outcome. Now, this one naman is prospective. Di ba pag prospective, you begin at the present and then you move on to the future. Pero it is a prospective cohort because you start first with the factors or the risk factors or mga exposure sa patient. Ato silang i-group together. Present ha, example, nag-smoke sila. Kani grupo ni sila sa mga smoker, kani grupo ni sila sa wala nag-smoke. Present time. And then we will follow them until the future kung kinsa ang nagkaroon og outcome of interest or wala. Example, lung cancer. So, we have here mga smoker, tapos pag-abot after 10 years, grabe dugay kay kamahuman sa imong study, no? Dili na to ni siya himuon sa ato ang research karon ha, kay basi di mo ka-graduate. So for example, again, smoker, niya after 10 years, tanawon nato kinsa ang nagkalang cancer sa ilaha o pila ka percent ang wala nagkalang cancer. Tapos kani, grupo sa mga wala naga-smoke. Pero i-check po gihapon nato kung pila ka percent ang nagkalang cancer o pila ka percent ang wala nagkalang cancer. So that is called again a prospective cohort. Prospective because it will begin in the present and end in the future. Ang retrospective, mag-start sa past, mag-end sa present. Pero cohort siya kay you start with the identification of the risk factor and then you will end with the outcome. Baliktad ang ano ha, baliktad class ang case control. You will start with the disease, katong mga naay sakit, and then you go back to the past because you will look at the factors kung asa sila na-expose. So let me give you a specific example for the cohort study. So you have here the exposure, kasi dira man ta nag-start sa factor. Exposed to asbestos, and then you have here another group na wala na exposed to asbestos. So this is a chemical substance. And then after that, kung ano ni siya, kung prospective cohort ni, so present time ni siya. And then we will follow them sa future kung kinsa sa ilaha ang nag-develop og mesothelioma o kinsa ang wala nag-develop og mesothelioma. So mesothelioma is a lung condition resembling tuberculosis, but it is not caused by bacteria. Syempre, it's caused by exposure to asbestos. So again, ang tawag ana is mesothelioma. Okay? Questions about the cohort study? I hope nasabtan to ang ako ang gidiscuss. Kasi you will really encounter them as you have your review of related literatures, or if you want to be a researcher someday, mungkin sa ang gusto mag-research someday, mag-masters or mag-proceed into doctorate degree, or ang inyuhang trabaho gyud kay mahimo og researcher class, you need to know these things. Walay pangutana. Kasi may ma'am, di ko ganahan mag-research. For the sake lang no, nga kabalo mo ani, and wala ta kabalo someday, na di ay mag-researcher sa inyo ha. Parehas ako when I was in college, I really hate research. Kapoy kayo magbuhat og research, kapoy magkandak og experiment. Siguro kung ingon sa una, hindi ko ganahan mag-research. Dili gyud ko gusto mag-researcher someday pag abot. To nakagraduate na ako, nag-pharmacist na ako, nagtrabaho, wala ako nagdahom na mag-researcher day ko. And since kailangan siya sa master's and sa doctorate na degree, you really have to love research. Kung naamoy plano mag-proceed pohon. Okay, walay questions or clarifications no. Buhi pa mo din ha. Basig sige na lang kung istorya din, wala di ko kay istorya. I hope buhi pamutanan ha kay I still have time. So let us continue on the third classification. Ay buhi pa dai. Classification based on investigator orientation. So parehas ako ang orientation is actually I'm more of an experimental researcher than a descriptive researcher. So mana siya based on an investigator orientation, you have here the experimental design. Ang inyo lang jud tandaan class, when you say experimental design, we have interventions here. Like when you say antibacterial agent, antibacterial study, you have the intervention, you have the plant material, or you have a certain chemical substance that you want to assess whether na siya antibacterial activity or not. So the key word here is intervention. We are establishing cause and effect relationship for this. So akong example again, antibacterial or antifungal, or you can have, for example, here on the screen, you have here investigators conducted a study about the newer versus older antihypertensive agents in African hypertensive patients, trial to compare the efficacy of single pill combinations of newer versus the older antihypertensive agents. This is an experimental study. You have here the intervention, the antihypertensive agent, but the investigators would like to know the difference between the single pill or the combination pill of the newer and the older antihypertensive agent. So there is an intervention. There is intervention here. We are establishing cause and effect relationship. So this will be the diagram for the research design. The study begins here, meaning mag-identify og population or mag-identify og study sample. And then we will divide them into two. There should be randomization. We cannot call it an experimental design without the randomization. So you have to group them randomly. First, group A, those group that will receive the intervention, and the group B will be the control. Most likely, they are the group that will not receive the intervention. And then, on the future, we will measure the outcome and compare them para makaingon yun tang effective imuhang intervention or dili based on the outcome in the future. But again, when you say experimental, there is an intervention, there is the control, and you have there the randomization. Dili ka pwede mo ingon nga, example na kay ilaga, 10 kabuok nga ilaga. Ang mga puti tanan, mag-receive silang intervention. Ang katong mga naay mga di ba na yung ilaga nga sagol-sagol ang color no, puti and then brown. I lang tong itom, we don't use that one in research. So kani sila ang may mga puntik-puntik kay sila ang control. Dili na siya class randomization kasi wala sila equal chance to be group or maka-receive sila sa intervention. Dapat randomized jud. We can have the fishbowl method for that. Mabunot nimo mo ni siya ang para sa mag-receive og intervention, kani para sa control. That's what you call randomization. Now, pag wala ka nag-randomize, Dili nato na siya matawag og true experimental design, but we will call it quasi-experimental design. So, I believe, usahay, madunggan ninyo ni, quasi-experimental lang akong study. Nung anong quasi-experimental lang man siya kasi na ay missing. And what is missing there is the randomization. So, for example, kung nakita ninyo on the screen, the same illustration, the same diagram with that of the experimental design, but what is the difference? Non-random assignment. Ikaw na bahala din ha kung kinsa imong gibutang sa group A, kinsa imong gibutang sa group B. Walay randomization nga nahitabo, ang tawag ana quasi-experimental study. So for example, na kay ilaga kaning mga duol sa kuha mo ni sila ang mag-receive sa treatment. Katong mga naa sa layo nga cage, mao na sila ang mag-receive sa ang group B or comparison or control. Dili to siya random. Kay tungod ikaw lang nag-decide, dapat random manggod na sila tanan equal chance na mabilong sa group A or mabilong sa group B. Yan, we call that quasi-experimental design. Okay, questions about the quasi-experimental design or the experimental design? That's the third classification of the research design. Wala. Pero class, sa research nowadays, ang pinakaginagamit is kani, classification based on question orientation. So unsa na sila? Una akong pirmi gina sa first meeting pa lang nato gina-discuss na nako ni sa inyo ha, kay again mauni ang pinaka ginagamit na mga research design. And we have here the quali, the quanti, and the mixed method design. And I believe I have discussed this with you dati. Pag sinabing qualitative research, this is only concerned sa exploration sa mga qualitative phenomenon also. And those are the things that we cannot quantify. Wala tayong numerical data nga makuha. Example, phenomenological research is concerned with the experience of our participants in a certain occurrence or phenomenon. So pag mag-interview ta, wala tayong numerical data. That's a qualitative research. But if your research has numerical data, syempre quantitative na siya. Mag-conduct kag experiment na kay numerical data nga makuha or maggamit kag questionnaire pero sa imong questionnaire na gihapon kay numerical data nga makuha kay nigamit ka og Likert scale kanang 5 4 3 2 1 nga na ay sa tawagan na verbal interpretation like strongly agree, moderately agree, disagree or something like that, na ay mga numbers involved, quantitative na siya. But there are also higher type of research like in the master's degree, naga-mixed method design na sila where they combine together the quanti and the quali. Meaning na sila'y qualitative na data from interviews, napod sila'y quantitative na data. So that's the fourth classification of the research design, and ito yung pinaka-ginagamit na research design sa mga research nowadays. So you have to be clear there now in your research kung asa ba na siya mag-fall. Quali, quanti, or mixed method. That's the first step. And muna inyong isulat sa research design under sa research methodology. Now, since I still have time, let me continue with the qualitative research design. Ang qualitative research design, ginaulit-ulit na ko niya siya. This is data-free or hypothesis-free, which means wala tayong numerical data for this. And the data will be coming from non-probability sample. When you say non-probability sampling, this one is the sampling wherein there is no equal chance for all members of the population to be selected in your study. Murag parehas akong ginaingon kagaina ba na walay randomization, tanan duol nga ilaga sa kuha, mo to silang ako ang ibutang sa control group. Ang tanan nga nasa layo mo to ang mag receive sa intervention. That's non-probability sampling. Wala sila equal chance to be selected in the studies. Mostly kasi sa qualitative study, non-probability ang ginagamit, purposive, to be exact, purposive sampling. Kana bitong mag-interview ka og tao, tapos example, medical technologist, tas ang imuhang gusto lang katong mga nag-work sa hospital sa General Santos City. So, dili na to siya equal chance sa tanang medtech. Kaya ang gusto lang man nimo tong nag-work sa hospital, tapos sa General Santos City lang pag yun. Naman ang ginamin sa data from non-probability sample. And this type of research does not really seek generalization. Wala ta nag-generalize because the experience of one person might not be true to another person. So again, we don't generalize. So what are the examples of the qualitative research design? We have there the narrative, phenomenological, the case study, and the ethnographic. Most of the time, ang qualitative research natin sa school are phenomenological. These studies are concerned about the experiences of our human subjects to a certain situation. So last year, we have a qualitative study that explores the experiences of medical technologies during the COVID-19 pandemic. So unsa ba ilahang na-experience working as a medtech during the pandemic? Phenomenological study to siya. We don't really have narrative na mga qualitative research. Narrative kasi is you will just narrate whatever the answer your participants have to your certain question about a certain phenomenon. Or we don't really do case studies. Most of the medical students, kanang mga med students na proper, naga-case study na sila, wherein they will have a limited na subject. Example, isa lang katao, tutukan nila, and they will write a case study for that. No, we don't do that now sa undergrad. Ethnographic also kasi mahirap mag-observe ng certain group of people sa kanilang culture. So again, ang mostly qualitative studies natin nowadays is phenomenological. Okay? Questions so far about the research designs? That ends our coverage for the midterms. We'll have, tanan nga na, gibutang na ako dito sa folder sa midterm class mo. Ito ang ato ang i-exam. Wala pa noon ko kahimo og exam, but you expect also essays at ang exam. For the meantime, please be updated lang sa Schoology kung may ibutang ko dito nga para sa revised part 1 of the introduction, dito lang ninyo sila ipasa. Okay? And then just wait for my comments na lang. The rest of the methodology section will be discussed sa finals.